For the newly indoctrinated, Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files follows the story of a professional wizard in Chicago. We've started our podcast as a way to help break down the series' most important moments, characters, and lore. This is McAnally's Dresden Files Podcast by Free Flow Rambling. Conjure by it at your own risk.
Welcome to the McAnally's Pubcast, brought to you by Free Flow Rambling. This is episode number 3, Pizza and Sporting. My name is Tansenn, and I am joined by Maggie and Jess.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Today, we are discussing chapters 4, 5, and 6. Dresden meets with Monica. She hires him to find her husband, Victor Sells, an amateur wizard who has been dabbling in magic and recently gone missing. She gives Dresden a scorpion charm that she claims Victor had been using, informs him of a lake house that they owned that she thinks he might have retreated to, and provides a $500 cash advance.
Yeah, so chapter 4, Harry heads back to the office and makes his deal, makes his case, makes his, I don't know, gets his job from Monica.
Gets his job, yeah, he kind of finds out, and I think there's a couple of interesting points kind of there, like how she doesn't think he's mysteriously missing or anything, just gone, but she mentions that he's recently gotten into magic. Mm-hmm. So that's why, like, there might be something, but she's like, I don't think...
He's dabbling in the occult.
Dabbling in the occult, yeah.
And she's concerned because he's not the sort who's going to up and ditch his family, so clearly there must be something going on here.
And yet she sort of also wants to draw away from that a little bit, right? Like, she's also kind of like...
She doesn't want it to be magic, but she also doesn't want to admit that her husband has just walked out on the family.
Yeah.
So she's in this tough position between both sides of this suck.
yeah, pretty much, exactly, right?
Well, and everything about her seems really inconsistent. So, like, she's talking about her husband losing his job, becoming recluse, but then throws all this money around.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, okay, yeah, that I could see simply from being that. A couple of things I can see that. I can see, one, that he had this good job at the Silverco Trading Company, so they're probably fairly set up. They seem definitely like the type of couple who's got their savings in their nest egg, so she probably doesn't have to panic yet. And it's a $500 retainer she gives to Harry, so it's a fair bit of money to Harry. It's not like a $5,000 retainer either, right?
True.
And the other thing I can see is, again, Monica being like, they've explained her as being very, like, she's very well kept and neat. She has, like, all the bits of information, right? She's like, here's a picture of my husband in, like, an envelope. She's like, here's the address to the lake house in an envelope. Here's your retainer in an envelope. You're like, you know, like, she's organized almost to a fault kind of a thing, right? And so I can also see her very much having her own savings, backup, tucked away, mad money, whatever, right? That completely separate from, like, any and all household finances. Like, would never dream of touching the rent, but she's got some money, right? So I can see
this is a woman with a choice. She's not, on her knees living off the streets. You're my last choice, Harry. This is more like I have the benefit of choosing who I go to in this moment.
Yeah, because things have just happened, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like he lost his job, like, 2 years ago. So
exactly. Like, in a lot of ways, the people who come to Harry are very last resort. But this is one of those times when, this is a woman who really, the police is the last resort for her. So she's like,
yeah,
here's someone who's both towing the line of magic and police. I'm going to get a little bit of the best of both worlds. But at the same time, like you said, she's kind of a study in opposite. She also doesn't want it to be
anything to
do with magic or police in that way as well. So
yeah,
doesn't want to give the actual proper name.
Yeah, right. So she's got, to which Dresden is eventually like, okay, well, if you give me nothing but false information, I cannot help you find this person. Like, you, right. So so we get the first hint of names. Well, I guess the first hint was maybe on the phone, because she hesitated giving him her name over the phone. But that idea that names are important, and I think at this point Harry says, that if you give him your own name from your own lips, kind of a thing, that gives somebody like him, a wizard, sort of the proper pronunciation and emphasis, and they could,
there's power in a name.
There's power in a name, and they could, so we get that, so she's obviously seen enough with hubby's dabbling to be concerned and be aware of some of these things. But at the same time, Harry's got a point, and he's like, if everything is a false trail, how am I supposed to find him?
Certainly, and also established in the start of Stormfront is that, the 21st century has sort of brought this new wave of magic believers to an extent. Obviously, it's kind of people who are always like, yeah, okay, but not really. But there's also a little bit on the edge of, they go and get their palms read and they sort of believe in psychics to the point where even the police are willing to hire a psychic expert.
Yeah.
So again, it's a little bit like, okay, your husband is dabbling in this, but even the 21st century attitude is a little bit like, maybe we're not going to admit it, but like also maybe.
Yeah.
I did really enjoy the fact that he had to get the job from Monica. He plays up his wizardliness.
Oh yes, he fulfills some of her expectations and
folding his hands together.
Yes, steepling his fingers and stuff. Yeah,
play
he's
into
like
the stereotype.
Yeah, he's like, obviously she has some expectations of what a wizard should be. So yes, I will give them to her so she feels better about her choice or whatever. But yeah. So yes,
which certainly, most people looking at a 20-something-year-old.
Well, yeah, right. 25-year-old. What the fuck are you gonna do for me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyways, so like you said, Harry gets this envelope with $500 cash. He also receives a possession of Monica Sell's husband, which is a
in
dried,
all senses, possibly. Yeah, this creepy ass
dried scorpion on a leather cord, which instantly gives Harry bad juju, possibly just because it is a dead animal.
Yeah, partially I think that's it. It's just creepy.
He hates the fact that it would have been against his skin when he wore it. And
that the way it was hung on the
scratchy.
talisman, the claws and things would have. Yeah, so he's like, what? Like, the thing isn't necessarily inherently bad or evil in and of itself, but just everything about it doesn't really, like, you're not really using it for anything good, I'm like, scorpions are poisonous and icky, and this dried out husk is icky and gross, and it would be scratchy and pokey against your he's like, basically I don't see anybody doing anything happy and jolly with this thing. So it's just all around kind of like and then I love how he sort of like totally gets like wigged out by it, like he's making his phone calls and stuff, because once Monica finally, and you can tell she is like pretty eager to get out of there when she finally gives up sort of the necessary details, and then she's like, gotta go get the kids out of school, gotta go, bye, see ya, and like basically runs out of there kind of a thing. So I love how Harry's first step is like, well, let's just check the morgues and hospitals, which fair. That is a pretty standard, I think, right? But he's like making calls, and this thing is just like creeping him out, and he like I don't even think he touches it, if I remember correctly. He like sweeps it,
like
he uses the envelope or whatever, and like sweeps it into a drawer and closes it. He's like, I don't know, I'm not saying anything, but not today, Scorpion, not today.
And on that, Aladdin, just before her exit, she does tip him off to a lake house that they also own.
Yes,
by
their
Chicago
vacation
Lake.
house, Chicago Lake Michigan.
Yeah, whatever, same thing.
That is the Chicago Lake. Yeah,
might be important, that one.
Not right now. Later.
Chicago Midwestern. That's all.
We apologize to all our Chicago listeners.
They call it Chicago Lake, especially them.
They're like, fuck the rest of the states and shit. This is Chicago's laying claim to it.
I'm just saying, I think most of Chicago would say fuck Illinois.
Except, well, maybe. They're going to fuck their own state.
Well,
because Chicago's in Illinois.
I know.
Michigan is the next. Okay.
My
that's
point,
why
though, is that,
Okay. Yeah.
So that's Chicago and its state of Michigan. Anyways, so that, Harry starts looking at morgues and hospitals.
Yeah. He's pretty psyched about his retainer. He can actually pay off his...
So psyched he goes for lunch. That's really step one.
Yeah, I know. He's like, I have money. I'm going to go eat something. Yeah. So,
I think that would bring us basically to chapter 5 then.
That is chapter 5.
That is chapter 4. Now chapter 5.
Well,
it brings us to
yes,
chapter
is what, I was agreeing with. Yeah. We have no idea what we're doing. So
we're just
that should be our tagline. That's our jingle.
Episode 3. We have no idea what we're doing. Yeah, our jingle.
We've no clue.
Which
Confused.
okay, you have to. So this is okay. So my chapter 5 summary part, with a little change in his pocket, going jingling-a-ling, which actually fits in with all of that. The song, anybody know?
Omnipotent.
Got a little
No.
change in my pocket, going jingling.
No.
Don't hand me no lines. Don't keep my love on those. Or no.
You must have dreamed it.
Oh, what the heck is it called?
Well, it doesn't have a name because it doesn't exist.
Shut up! I'm gonna beat you.
Do I keep this? What is going on?
Depends how it plays out in the end.
Select all, delete.
My honey, my darling, don't put my love upon my shelf. She said, don't hand me no lines and keep your hands to yourself. Okay, now,
okay.
But that's how it starts. He's like, got a little change in my pocket, going jing-a-ling-a-ling, and he's going to call his baby up, and she's like, Right?
That one part you sang and we all recognize is actually the only part that's ever been published.
Yeah, okay.
And you
but
rewrote the rest of it.
I'm just saying, as long as y'all recognize that part, that
Sure.
was it. He has a little change in his pocket, going jing-a-ling-ling.
So chapter 5.
Let's do pop.
Harry sings a song.
I don't think Harry ever sings a song.
But he should.
I'm sure he does.
He whistles once or twice to be annoying, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure at one point he had to have sung a song.
Maybe.
In the shower.
Usually he's just getting...
Well, I mean, he does start playing guitar later on. You think he never sings along with it?
That's true.
Right.
Maybe. Maybe he just hums or whistles.
Maybe. Maybe so.
Don't know.
Okay,
So chapter 5.
lunch.
The most important meal of Harry's day.
Our namesake. He goes to
McAnally's pub.
Dresden heads to McAnally's pub. He discusses his doubts about a new street drug called 3-Eye that supposedly gives users second sight. He's interrupted by Susan Rodriguez, who is looking for a story for the arcane. She convinces him to go on a date.
So, Harry heads up to our namesake McAnally's pub. It is a hole in the ground, old world, dingy to an extent pub.
Yeah.
It's,
He likens it in the description. I don't know. I'm not sure here, but at later points, so I don't think this is really a major spoiler, but likens it to Cheers, where you had to sort of go down the stairs into this sort of basement pub as opposed to an above ground sort of. So for those of you that are familiar with Cheers.
and this is certainly more of a word of mouth sort of establishment rather than on the map.
Yeah, this is not your McDonald's type franchise, big name.
Certainly no. Civilians are not coming in here on the daily. It is much more if you know of this place, you have to have an extent of knowledge about the supernatural
You're
world.
somewhere at least on the fringes of...
Or
yeah.
know someone on the fringes.
Or know someone on the fringes of... Yeah, it doesn't really... So Max kind of attracts and accommodates that sort of supernatural crowd at two
Under the
varying
radar.
degrees. Yeah. So you don't all have to be big, powerful wizard like Harry, but your little kitchen witches or your slight psychic
I sense a disturbance in the fourth.
sense
but
of
not
disturbance
much
in the
else.
fourth. Yeah, exactly, right. Any of those kind of people, this is the kind of place that they will sort of find out about and sort of gravitate to. And as such, Mac has set it up to disperse the grumpy energies around
Of any
wizards
sort
and
of
things. Yeah,
wizards
so-
and anyone else who happens to come to this establishment. It's quite...
Yeah, he makes it so that things are... So again, alluding back to like Harry's problem with technology and screwing it up and stuff like that. Max has like no electronics. He's got no fancy jukeboxes. He's got like an old player piano. He doesn't have any like video games and TVs and things like that most pubs and bars have now.
Mostly because they'd probably explode.
It's exactly why. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like they're not going to last with those kind of people in there. So
And ultimately, the draw is not entertainment, but Mac's famous ale and steak sandwich.
sandwiches, which at least 2 out of the 3 of us can relate to. Someone has not matured enough yet to appreciate a good steak sandwich, but that's okay. that may be part of her indoctrination through this process.
Nice.
We may have to.
That's it. After the podcast, we're all going for steak sandwich.
Yeah,
Are we
Jess.
talking about me or
We're talking about you. Yeah, Jess is eyeballing us like, what are you talking about?
I eat steak sandwiches. I don't drink beer.
Oh, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I really like brown ale. What are you talking about?
I really like Coke.
See, there you go. That's your connection. What was I say? Oh yeah, so the bar. He's got 13 pillars in random spots. He's got 13 tables laid out randomly. He's got 13 stools at the bar. So
13 fans. It is quite the
13 lazily whirring fans that
magic displacement.
displacement, yes, disturbing,
Establishganza.
disrupting, establishganza,
Whatever
what?
the word is.
Extravaganza?
That's the word.
Yes. So we get a sense here that 13 is sort of a magically unfriendly number.
The unmagic number?
The unmagic number? Yeah. It is not, not the magic number, the unmagic number.
Or at least, a net zero, if not a negative.
Yeah. So it helps to just kind of break that up. It doesn't make any sort of... Again, I think the sort of the odd numbers of it exactly right. Whereas if you had like even numbers, it's easier to place them out in even patterns and have, right? And he's just not doing that. He's just breaking up the flow of energies to make sure that people's auras, right, just the general tempers and things of people don't clash too much. And then again, right, that technology flummoxing kind of thing isn't. So yeah, so Harry mentions that it's a little bit delicate for him because being a very tall person, almost 7 feet tall, and that Mac's place is kind of a low ceiling, so he has to really be careful of those ceiling fans going all the time. He's like, really be careful of how I walk around. But basically, yeah. And honestly, it sounds like the kind of place I would love to go to. Like, again, it just sounds like this awesome little quiet pub where, yeah.
Until Harry Dresden shows up.
Until Harry Dresden shows up. And yeah.
Certainly, it is generally depicted to be a very easygoing, this isn't
homey,
meant to
comfy,
be
friendly. It's not pretentious. It's not trendy.
Well, yeah, it's not like, the Magic World's raving nightclub where,
Yes.
it's much more very
Like the Irish
low-level,
pub.
comfortable,
Yeah.
relaxating.
Yeah, I think Harry's description is really good. That when he first found McAnally's pub, he says he felt like a wolf returning to an old favorite den. Right? It just, this is my place.
Just feels
this
right.
This is my peep. So, and I just sort of mentioned too that like he recognizes a lot of people by sight. At least he doesn't necessarily know sort of who they are, but has a bit of an idea of.
Certainly the supernatural crowd, or at least Mac's patronage, is a regular.
Yeah,
Sort
right.
of.
So so he recognizes several of the people in there. And I can't remember if it's this initial description that he sort of mentions a couple of them, like, like a couple of guys that have a talent for checkers or something like that, and that sort of a thing, right? So it's that low level, but some of them he knows sort of what they are or aren't capable of or whatever, but without necessarily knowing them or being buddies per se with them. But Mac knows him, right? He's definitely...
Well, with this chapter, it also introduces two of our two main characters, Susan and Mac himself.
And Mac himself, yeah. Who you don't learn a lot about, but you still just kind of like him. He's that solid sort of...
The strong silent
The
type.
strong silent type. Yeah, he doesn't talk very much. He doesn't, like Harry will sort of prattle on inanely, which I can't
Very
relate
regular
to.
and steady presence throughout both
But-
Harry's life and the books.
Yeah, he just is who he is. It's like you can't quite peg his age or, whatever. But Mac just, stalwart, good old Mac, making his ale, cooking his food. And then, Harry gets all freaked out at first because they're chatting. Well, this is the thing. This is where Harry's perusing the newspaper first. And there's a headline about the three-eye drug. Then Harry's like, so that's, we find out in the story that these kids, like, took this drug and then, like, basically burned down a shop because it was destined to do so and it was going to happen anyway. So they, beat
Some
fate
sort of
to the punch.
hallucinatory drug that boasts seeing into another plane of existence, or seeing things as they really are.
Opening that third eye.
Exactly, opening that third eye, which as...
Yeah, and Harry just thinks this is BS. He's like, nah, I don't see how a drug could do that. Like, I don't see how anybody could actually make that happen.
It mentions that he even reports that to the police, to the SI, that he thinks it's baloney at that point.
No, he says, no, that's right. He says if there was really something to it, SI would have called me in already. That's what it is. Yeah, he's saying, he's like, SI has not called him in to consult on this supposed supernatural drug kind of a thing, or supernatural causing drug. But that's part of why he discredits it. He's like, the department would have called me in if this was really anything to look at. So, and Max just kind of like, sure. And then he's like, Harry, you were followed. And Harry had been too tense for too much of the day to not feel his shoulders tighten up under his jacket. It's almost a direct quote. The first part I had. I'd been too tense for too much of the day not to feel my shoulders restrict. And anyways,
at this point, as you said, soon to be main character Susan Rodriguez introduces herself to the Dresden Files.
Indeed. And I sort of like how he's like, oh, hey, Susan, without turning around, and she all like freezes up, and he's like, ha ha ha, people like automatically assume everything's wizardry, you know. He's like, totally wouldn't think that like I smelled a perfume, you know. And he uses that. He doesn't correct her or anything like that, right? Like, I kind of like how how Harry lets some of these
wizard Larry.
Well, that and it shows he's got really great
You're a Larry, Harry.
observation skills.
Yes, he has. He does have those sort of.
And certainly we brought up in earlier episodes too, is that a lot of his shtick is just being able to think. Let alone not the magic even, but just his ability to
put two and two together and see. Yes, exactly. He is a lot more observant than people give him credit for. And yeah,
as well as being very tuned into women, as we've also mentioned.
As being very tuned into women, yeah. So so I kind of love that Harry's just allows a lot of that to play along, and he doesn't bother correcting people on things like that. It's like, hey, if they want to think this is all mystical and crazy, that's all right. We'll let them think it's all mystical and crazy. So so Susan's all like, what? Oh my God. And then proceeds to try and flirt her way into some information on the grotesque hotel murders that Harry attended earlier.
Right, so I didn't read it, so maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but we do find out who she works for and why and all that, right?
Basically as he introduces her, he's like, Susan
works
catches with a perfume and recognizes Susan, a reporter for the Chicago Arcane, which we are debating because Jess and I, in later books, we had it more firmly in our minds that it was the Midwestern Arcane. So now we need to confirm that.
The internet said Midwestern, so I believe that is a Jim Butcher mistake, that he has described the magazine under two different names.
Yeah, so he might have initially introduced it as the Chicago Arcane, but then proceeds, 99% of the time thereafter to refer to it as the Midwestern Arcane.
And if any of our listeners have any opinion, feel free to go onto the
keep it to yourself.
Blog.
Just kidding.
And let us know what you think the actual name of the...
Head on Discord for the discourse.
Yeah.
Head on over to Discord for
what you think the actual name is.
A Discord. Yeah. So it does. Basically, as part of her introduction, says she works for this mostly yellow rag. So it's basically like your supermarket tabloid.
The National Enquirer.
I was going to say, I was about to, but I'm like, can we name names? Is that...
I don't see why.
Yeah, so it's basically your
Please don't sue us. Please don't sue us.
Yeah, love your magazine. Newspaper thing.
Susan Rodriguez proves that they're not baloney.
That sometimes, So he's like, most of the time it's, shape-shifting alien Girl Scout or whatever.
Toads raining from the sky.
Insane nonsense. But occasionally, she actually, they do get it right, and it's a real sort of supernatural. But because it's buried in with so much of that other stuff and such a sensationalized kind of paper that, most people
Harry points out that it's unfortunate that Rodriguez has an eye for the legitimate scope, but works for such a discredited newspaper because...
Yeah, because she herself is actually a damn good reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And does her work and does it well and
uses all of her assets.
Exactly.
And, yes,
and Harry is
she
one
tries
to throw
use them all on.
and Harry does occasionally throw her the bone every once in a while, but never giving her too much. So
Stop chuckling.
Spoiler.
Choose your own adventure. Go to episode 71.
Yes. Well, yes, she
Born?
tries to convince Harry to indeed throw her a bone and tricks him into a date. Yeah. But yes, Harry does sometimes give her bits and pieces on sort of trivial fluff pieces, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And they have a very, very loose working relationship already. They're well aware of each other and have been working together to a point.
Yeah, I think this is where they mentioned their trip down. Dresden had mentioned he'd recently done a quick case for someone in Branson, Missouri, who thought their house was haunted, and kind of turned out to be nothing. And Harry couldn't really charge him much for anything because he didn't really do anything. But Susan had sort of followed down on that story, and so he's asking her about how Branson turned out. And she's like, oh, it's great. He got like this fake psychic and they did like a whole big show and it was like pretty glitzy. And Harry's like, yeah, whatever. Walk there, you know?
And certainly also to maybe give a point to Susan too is that her eye for detail or journalism is that she was kind of on Harry's case just about as soon as he'd opened the business.
Yes, she was one of the first people
to, it wasn't like she stumbled upon him. It was somewhat right at the beginning that as soon as he put himself on the map, she was right there at his front
as soon
door.
as he put an ad in the yellow pages that said wizard, she's like, how about an interview? So now she wants the scoop on these exploding broken hearts. And Harry's like, no, this is way too hot for you. You don't want to get involved. Like, he doesn't say it to her because he doesn't want to tell her, but he's like, there's like mobsters and magic, and I just don't want her getting tangled up in this.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, it's not really mentioned at this point, but he's had this case for all of an hour, and he's already spoken to, detectives, mobsters, the reporters. And that's a little bit of the theme for the rest of Harry's life throughout this book, is that when Harry's involved, the world is involved.
Yeah. Once things start going, they get going. There's
really just snowballs.
There's not a lot of downtime for Harry. Things move pretty quick once they get going. So he keeps trying to discourage her, and she's not really having any of that. She wants in on this, so she keeps trying to ask him questions, and he's like, no. So she's like, want to go out? Would you mind going out with me? No. Wait, what? So she's like, too late. We're going out Saturday. So then Harry's got to decide to head out to the lake house tonight because now he's going to be busy with Susan and stuff in the future and Bianca and stuff. So
he's got a real odd sense of timing. I've noticed that he's already tried to sort of double books himself all nearly.
Yeah, he has.
Keeps doing that to himself.
It's so funny because you do sort of see, like in the beginning, right, with Monica, he's like, no, I don't know if I can. But ultimately, you're right. Yeah, like he'll end up taking on all this stuff. And I mean, there are times where he's kind of like, I don't really I'm kind of busy right now, but somebody will tug at his heartstrings or his reason, or and he kind of can't okay, I'll try and fit this into, and so he is somewhat able to say no, but sort of in the thick of things when stuff starts happening in these, it's hard for him sometimes to not take on stuff and agree to help out or look into it.
Right, and I think Jim Butcher actually does that on purpose, just so he can get that momentum moving for the books, just to keep.
Certainly, it does help the story
really
roll, but
fast.
it also, to another point, is also just.
It's an element of distraction, I think.
Well, exactly, and you'll notice this as we get on to later books, or even at the end of each book. There's always a moment. We're generally with Harry throughout the books. But then there's always a moment right at the end of the book where there was always one conversation or one event that the readers are
that
never
we weren't
present
privy
for.
to. Yeah.
And it's kind of always seems to be that, Harry's got X, Y, Z all at once. So the reader's, reading X and Y, and you kind of remember that Z was mentioned 12 chapters ago, but...
Yeah. Like, oh, wait, this all started off with a W.
Exactly.
But we haven't. So, and I totally think that's part of it. I think Harry gets so involved and in depth and on the go, jam-packed kind of a thing that I think it helps you know, like
not only keeps the story going, but it also doesn't
yeah,
give
it keeps
to the
you sort of jumping
reader as
around
well.
where you're like, exactly, like, you know, at the time you might read it, you're like, oh, this is going to be important, I'm going to remember this, but then all of a sudden a bunch of other really hectic so you kind of can't help but like, and then it sort of comes, you're like, oh yeah, right, that was going to be, and then so he kind of floats.
He's very good at
around.
misleading.
Yeah, without actually misleading, because he's not really giving you any faults. He's just piling so much on there. It's just like a whirlwind. So much as Harry, I mean, that's much how Harry suddenly goes, oh shit, there was a W. Wait a minute, this is.
Well, and I think even like,
yeah,
like when you read the book one, you do get into a little bit of like, oh my God, like what is it? There's so much going. And when you compare that to later books, you're like, oh, nothing even happened in book one. Like, why were we even worried about it? But when you're actually reading them one at a time, you like things start building up a lot more. And like, even though it's easy to compare earlier books to later books with like the level, it's like, no, those things don't even compare. But in the moment, there actually is still so much constantly happening. And it also helps add to like I know for me when I'm reading, if I'm getting into a part of the book where it's like, and I'm reading it like like I myself am not
having
like
a hard time fully absorbing
slowly when I'm getting into a fast-paced part of the story. Like my eyes also start jumping through the text that much faster, and I start like, I don't need to read these thes and ands. Like, give me the I want these hard nouns right now and move on from there, and like, you know,
right.
And I think that's another part of just, again, the overloading, and like it keeps the story moving. It keeps the reader in suspense as much as it keeps Harry
well,
in
I was going to
suspense.
say, because you're kind of moving along, right, with Harry in that, right? Like you say, like, as Harry's just starting to kick it into a little bit higher gear, so are we, because we weren't really there. Like he said, most of everything up until now is like, I find people's lost keys, or like a coin collection, or, right? It's pretty simple, run-of-the-mill, blah
Right,
blah
and then
blah.
Harry walks down the street and a mobster shows up, and you're like, okay.
And so you're kind of like right there. So as things start to escalate for him, you're sort of right there to things. And exactly, it's like part of you is like, how, but you have to remember, like, oh yeah, this is kind of, Harry's kind of doing the same thing. Harry's like, what the fuck is this suddenly? Like, why do I suddenly have?
Certainly, and it's also, again, and also like we've written about the words too, it's not like a character who's just constantly like, oh, I'm so sarcastic, I'm so sarcastic, I'm so sarcastic. Harry legitimately does it. You also kind of witness the whole like, you know, Harry's never like, oh, well, you wouldn't know this, but in my, like, you're very much like, you learn at the same time Harry learns it, and it's like, I think it helps to make, again, this is more later on in books, you get very frustrated when characters don't believe Harry, because you're like, how could you not know this? We saw this already, how come no one ever believes this guy? Like, but it's also like, sometimes when you read other books, it's like, you almost empathize with the other characters too, because you weren't there with them, but I find a lot of the time Harry, like, it is a little bit more immersive sometimes, because like, you're very much brought through the 2 + 2 + 10 is 12 versus 14. I don't know how to do math. Whereas a lot of other stories are just like, you're supposed to know that everything is 14 already, and just the author is telling you that it's supposed to be 14 except 14, but you very much more see Harry doing the 2 + 2 whatever sort of work, you know.
Which,
you know,
what was I going to say to that? And Harry's course of, you know, where like sometimes you watch him go through the, oh shit moment too, right? Like sometimes he's like, oh yeah, I'm just a wizard, I know things, you know, but it's like inside he's like, yeah, I had no fucking clue what was going on, you know, like, and I kind of love that too, where sometimes he like kind of plays along with it until he figures it out, or sometimes he's like, oh, I just realized this, but I totally acted like I already knew that already. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And I love some of that kind of too, that you're going, yeah, you're like, what the fuck? And you're like, okay, yeah, Harry knows that too.
And it's a real depth to the character as well, just because you see those flaws.
And that also, you just to throw in as well, you also kind of like, you take this walk with Harry so often that it's also a little bit less frustrating for the reader, I think, because sometimes, you know, you like, Harry's very strong in his convictions, that sometimes when you see him say, you know, 2 + 2 = 5, you were with him the whole time. You're like, yeah, 2 + 2 does equal 5. Like, I was there with you for the first 2, and I was there with you for the second 2. It absolutely equals 5. So sometimes you get like, you know, you do this whole walk with Harry where he does end up being wrong in the end, and you're like, oh shit, like, because you were with him the whole time. I think a lot of the time it also brings it back, whereas like when other when other characters are making moves, and that was especially prevalent in Battlefront, when a lot of other truths came out about other characters, and it was like totally blindsided Harry, it was also blindsiding us because it's like we were here for 1 and
We
2
thought
and
we
3
knew
and
what
4 and
was-
5,
yeah.
and you watch all this. And as much as Harry can be an unreliable narrator, you do this whole walk with him all the time that you're like, I feel like as the reader, I know.
And sort of to go back to that walk with him of like sometimes how he's like, oh, ha, 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 I'm not going to let them know. I think the other thing I like is that a lot of times he does. Like a lot of times he's like, yeah, I totally didn't have that shit figured out. And they're like, well, what? And he's like, yeah, no, I just realized that, right? And I kind of like and appreciate that about him too sometimes, right? That, and I think it does keep his enemies and probably his allies a little bit off balance too, right? Because he does this mix of being like, I know so much, and like, yeah, I have no fucking clue what's going on.
Harry does his talk with Susan. He kind of throws her a bone, but not really. Agrees to that he will meet up with her on Saturday. But that throws a wrench in his plans, which means he'll have to head out to the lake house tonight instead.
Yeah.
Which then brings us on to chapter 6, where Harry does make his way out to the lake house.
Indeed.
In his trusty Blue Beetle.
The Blue Beetle. Oh my god. I am less familiar with the namesake. The what was it? The telephone company or something? Was that the cartoon it came from? But anyways,
you're talking about.
that's okay. The Blue Beetle was named after like a superhero character.
Pretty sure it wasn't. I'm pretty sure it was named after the fact that his car was a Blue Beetle.
Allow me to skip ahead to book 4, where
Nope.
Elaine says, the electric company, that's what it was. I can't believe you named your car after a character on the electric company. And yes, I think that part of the reason was because it was initially a blue Volkswagen Beetle. And so it fit, like calling it the Tick or something, because the Tick was a blue bug. However,
The water beetle?
the water beetle is a play
Took
on...
a long time for that name to click for me.
Yeah, she never... Well, we're jumping ahead again. We can't put that in
I
yet.
know. But anyways, okay, so Harry heads out to the lake house.
Harry heads out to the lake house. The Blue Beetle. The Blue Beetle is awesome. I love the Blue Beetle. His mismatched ragtag, patched up old multicolored car. Excuse me, hiccups. Which he drives, he explains, because his mechanic has assured him it's like the easiest car in the world to fix. And because it's like an older, like 60s model Beetle, it's not got anything too fancy. There's nothing really computerized. So most of the time it keeps plugging along and it's easy to get parts and fix. So when it does go, he said, what does he say? He can keep it running like 8 or 9 days out of 10 or something is good enough for him.
Something to that effect.
Something
And
to that effect, yeah.
again, just reiterates the technology created before the Second World War.
He's not driving no Lamborghini
Much
or
more
Ferrari.
reliable.
This guy, that barely would get him down the street before it blew. Yeah.
Dresden returns home to gather some supplies and then drives to the lake house. He snoops around some, picks up a film canister, and then summons Toot Toot, trapping him in a circle, whom he asks if anyone has been around the lake house. Toot returns and informs Harry that there was a pizza delivery to mortals who had been sporting and needed to recover their strength.
So he stops at home, and he alludes to this mister who I have to assume is a pet because he says he puts it in his dish, but that doesn't really say anything more about it. He just says he puts the steak leftovers in Mister's dish, and then he grabs like some bread and milk and honey in a backpack and a little dish set and hits the road. So Lake Providence is just the other side of the border in Michigan. So yeah, and Harry didn't get really any permission to go inside it. So he kind of knocks on the door and stuff, but like nobody answers. So he's like, all right, whatever, there's nobody here. Which I kind of get. Some of his suppositions here, like, I don't know. I don't have a lake house. His whole thing about the trash cans being, and he does kind of spell it out. He's like, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean, but the fact that the trash bins like weren't out by the side of the road that were back, because I'm like, well, yeah, it could have been the garbage bin. He's like, he could have paid a neighbor. It was funny. It was, again, maybe I'm not suburban enough. Maybe I'm not vacation lake housey enough. It was one of those things to me that I was like, it's great that you're giving us a clue. I don't think I necessarily would have imagined the placement of the garbage cans to be anything significant at all.
Right.
I don't know if that meant anything to you guys. If you were like, yeah, totally. They would totally be left by the curb if they put the garbage. Like, I don't know. It just was sort of one of those almost reaching to me. Like you're throwing us, like you're trying to hint something, but it feels like you're having to put
pushed
it in.
a little too hard.
Pushed a little too, yeah. I don't know. To me. And same thing, the fact that he's like, oh, nobody answered. I'm like, again, maybe just me. I don't get a lot of visitors. I don't know are coming. And I'm not real big on like solicitors. So there are times I won't answer my door if I don't know who, like if I'm like upstairs napping and I'm like, fuck this, I want my nap. And somebody like knocks at the door. I'm like, dude, it's probably someone selling me like a newspaper subscription I don't want. Fuck them.
That is a little bit of like, the difference between media and real life. Because, a lot of the time you see in a TV show where they knock on the door and no one's there. So all the cops pull their guns. It's like, no, in real life, like, you're in the bath, you can go fuck yourself. Like, leave it alone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of like, it's like, oh, there's nobody home. And I'm like, okay, Harry, sure. But especially, I guess, just a little bit in that line of work, you'd think. But yeah, but he doesn't bust in and check things out because he's like, well, I wasn't really invited to. So that would just kind of be rude. And I think this is his first mention of like thresholds and that if he sort of goes, because he mentions there's like a security system. He's like, oh, that's not a problem because I could just like hex that down or whatever. But breaking it might cause the alarm to trigger in and of itself. And he's like, plus, if he goes through the threshold uninvited, he's going to leave most of his magic and power and defenses and stuff behind. So he's like, it's just kind of rude. I'm just not going to bother. I don't need to. So he snoops around outside and finds the film canister under the deck. So see, to me, that I can conceivably, I'm like, sure, it could have been an accidental leftover from the 4th of July. Or to me, that seems a more likely clue than garbage cans. But that's just me.
Right, a little more feasible.
That one. I agree on that one.
Yeah.
Finding a film under the deck, sure, that could be. But yeah, we find out even that isn't of a whole lot of interest. He heads down to the lakeshore itself. And this is one of my favorite parts. And this is definitely one of the ones because when they first put out the little sound bites from the book is one of the quotes from this scene that Marsters did. And I'm like, I don't really know what's going on. I don't really know who these characters are. But I was like, this is like the best scene ever. So, yeah, he goes and makes his little circle down by the lake shore. Are you
typical summoning circle
of
the average wizard, Take out your chalk and do up a containment circle.
This is the first time we see him use magic.
This is the reader's first time, that we get to see him actually displaying his magical prowess.
He really is a wizard.
Yes, it hasn't been taught this whole time.
Yes, he just, Yeah, so he scratches out, uses his pocket knife or something, digs a little circle in the earth, puts out his little dish set and the bread and milk and honey and the bread and milk and honey and the bread and milk and honey.
So, your offering, your ritual, your
your bait, your lure,
your doll set,
your doll
furniture.
Set. Yeah. And then he kind of he sort of specifically mentions that he just like almost closes it, like he sort of seals it but not quite, and then he sort of backs off out of sight and calls a name. Capital N. Yeah. So he does this whole big spiel on the importance of names and the power of names. And
now we find out the reason, one specific reason why.
Why, with Monica and all that kind of stuff is, because he's like, you can sort of reach out and touch them. He's like, wizards collect names like a big old Rolodex kind of a thing. And so, same way you can reach out and touch somebody if you know their phone number, a wizard can do the same thing if he's got your name.
And trap you in a circle.
So he called. And it's sort of funny. It's one of these things where I'm like, it would probably never ever do justice, so I never want to hear it. But at the same time, it sparks that curiosity in you because he's like this beautiful rolling litany of syllables, right? And it's just like this. So sounds like such a beautiful mystical fairy name. And he's like, and he just goes by Toot Toot. So you're like, but what's the real name, right? But I'm like, I don't ever really want Butcher to actually do, because it's one of those things that would probably never ever live up to your imagination, or if you ever heard it, you'd be like, oh, that's it. Oh. But that I love. But yeah, he just goes by Toot Toot. So that's how.
Well, and he can't let us actually summon Toot Toot as well.
That's right. True. Yes. Yeah. Harry
For
just
his own
giving
safety.
those things out.
Well, to another point is that as you go through the books, you'll discover that these are written very much as Harry's journal.
Yes.
So this isn't Jim Butcher's written. It's almost to the point of this is being written in the same style as Lemony Snicket. It's
Yes.
you're supposed to be getting these. There's a point that he's an unreliable narrator. Is that this is Harry's personal accounts of each and every situation.
It's not.
So he can't write
omniscient.
down the name. He'd be, giving himself a lot of duress.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think he does say something about that too, because he's like, what was it? He's like, you think wizards just give this kind of information away? Yeah, he's like, this is my name. I'm not just handing it out to people. But yeah, but it is.
Except to maybe Chauncey.
Oh,
Too soon.
his own name, sure, but
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
But yes, it is definitely something of a name is power in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so combined with the offering to tempt and bring and the circle to hold, you need the name to
Sort of catches
catch
attention.
the attention.
Yeah,
And as with most works of fiction and a lot of the fairy world that Jim Butcher has built upon, takes a lot out of Shakespearean work, which is also indicative of several other works, but for the most part he follows loosely in the guides of A Midsummer's Night Dream, and that you must call the name 3 times to force their hand. You could only call them once or twice, but the fairy doesn't, or the being of any sort, fairy or otherwise, has no choice but to act upon it upon the third utterance of their name.
Sort of obsessive compulsive.
It's quite Beetlejuice, Bloody Mary, any of those sorts of stories. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
On the third incantation of the name, you'd better be ready for whatever the hell you've called.
Yeah. Because yes, they sort of.
You've caught their attention and they are coming, so you'd best be ready.
Yeah, they are so disposed, I guess, to.
And to that point, the offering and the holding are not necessary to call them.
No, that was more
It is
so.
really just their name. The other things are to
Just a
help.
courtesy.
to appease,
Courtesy or to help,
to appease or whatever.
safety for yourself,
Yeah,
any of such.
because when Toot comes in and then eventually takes the bread and that, and Harry seals the circle, and he's like, yeah, that's it. Because he mentions it there, right, where he's like, what was I gonna say? Him extracting, right, where he's like, oh, I kind of want some information, and you guys always sort of know what's going on, and he's like, yeah, sure, and Harry's like, no, promise, and he's like, I promise, right, like, oh, and I love this exchange with Toot too, right, he's like, Harry, you're taking all the drama out of this, like, you just
such
get
a wonderful
I
moment.
know,
So
Toot's
wonderful.
like, I'm gonna fill your mouth with dung, and oh god, I wish I could you ham-handed,
Ultimately,
flat-footed,
things don't like being
big-nosed
summoned. They
mortal
take it to
worm.
be.
Yeah, and he's like, oh,
Things don't like being summoned. They
Poke
take
out
it
your
as an
eyes
insult.
and fill your mouth with dung and the whole. Yeah, and then he's like, come on, and he's like, Harry, you're totally taking the drama out of this. Fine, yes, I'll help you. He's like, can you not play along? Like, come on.
Toot doesn't really mind all that much.
No,
Just needs to
he has sort of.
Have the protocol of being angry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Like,
That's an image.
It's an image to uphold, and exactly. And this game we break where you get the hint that yes, Toot just sort of helped him out with little things before. But it's like you gotta. It's the drama. You gotta. The play is the thing.
Just like Harry. Hey, sometimes you play into that wizard aspect. Sometimes, you have to be a belligerent fairy.
But that's where Harry points out, and he's like, like when he's the I promise, and he's like, anything said thrice or whatever means that, they're pretty much bound to that. So the fact that at first Toot was like, sure, I'll help you, and Harry's like, no, and because he's like, okay, now that you've said it 3 times, now I know for sure, like, you're definitely not going to weasel out of it in any way.
Screw me,
Yeah. So, there's, I love Toot.
So ultimately speaking, this chapter is kind of the reason for this entire podcast.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, we put a lot of credence and credit and emphasis on Murphy and Marcone. Those are the first 2 you meet, and then that's quickly followed up by Susan and Mac, and those are just as important. But Toot kind of doesn't get the same credit, but he's actually he doesn't necessarily make the same appearances that the others do.
Yeah.
But I think that when he is around, his impact is actually quite telling and
yes,
certainly,
that was definitely one of my
cause for
yeah
significance.
Yeah, no, Toot, I absolutely adore Toot and his interactions with that initial sound clip of Toot, where so when he finally comes back, so yeah, he agrees to go rustle up the information for Harry and takes off. And then when he comes back and gives his little rundown of Golden Eyes, was talking to Blue Blossom, who was talking to Red Nose or something.
It's very quick. It only takes a moment.
Mego Aspens too. Yeah. And he's like, but that whole exchange of, he's like, and they said then the pizza truck arrived or whatever. And Harry's like, pizza? He's like, oh, Harry, breathed Toot. Haven't you ever had pizza before? Of course I have. Toot looked wounded. And you didn't share? Like, oh my God, that was one of the things
Best line ever.
Made me fall in love with it. I love the way Marsters read it. It was so sweet. And you can just like picture, like, Harry, haven't you ever had pizza before? Of course I have. You didn't share? So yeah, I love how that like marks a whole new beginning in their like relationship and stuff like that. And he's like, all right, I didn't know. I'll bring you pizza sometime. And he's like, yes. Right?
That pizza goes a long way.
That certainly does.
Right? So, but that whole thing, it's just,
Learning that the little folk like pizza may have been the most important thing Harry ever learned.
Right? Indeed.
Certainly the most rewarding.
Yeah. Paid the most dividends in a lot of ways. But, and so that's basically, So then
so ultimately, Toot makes his promise and gets the information Harry needs.
Keeps his promise,
and he does it incredibly fast.
Within half an hour, he's like, usually Toot took about half an hour to round up whatever information I need, and true to that, he came zipping back across the lake, and so we found out that they're speedy little devils. Right. They are good and they are fast.
There's enough of them that one has always seen something.
Yeah, right. Like Toot's got that good connected network kind of a thing that Golden Eyes talked to Blue Blossom and talked to Mego Aspens, who said she saw, and exactly right. You're like, heard from a friend of a friend of a friend of mine, this is what's going down. So he kind of like Harry's sporting. He's like, Toot's reference to sporting. He's like, they're generally not too interested in mortals' concept of sports unless it involves a whole lot of lust and nudity. So Victor was having some kind of party for there to be any sporting involved.
If only more sports could be like that.
Well, if you harken back to the original Olympics, the Greek Olympics had a lot of like naked wrestling and nothing to interfere with. No,
I'm sure things popped up all the time.
No arrow right? No clothes to weigh you down when you're swimming or running or wrestling or giving them something to grab onto. You just
physics.
Went right. It was just you and you alone. But so we.
So sure, if sporting's involved, we're talking murder or sex.
Less than so. Yeah, exactly right.
And ultimately, that pizza had been delivered. Hence this pizza conversation. So Harry's pretty much got to confirm that if no one's here now, there certainly was.
They're right, exactly. He's like, I mean, that's what he tries to like narrow down. Like, well, which pizza car? And he's like, Harry, he's like, okay, fine.
The pizza truck.
He's trying to narrow down for what the pizza place is. Give him a place to start looking or whatever. And he's just like, the pizza truck, Harry. Oh no, that was I was gonna say the penchant for following necking teenagers and things like that. And I heard it brought up somewhere again where they were like, there's like the sex again and the things, and I'm like, see, again, this isn't necessarily to me Butcher focusing on like sex and stuff like that and peeping. I was more just like, again, I think this is sort of a verified sort of fairy trait. And again, I think it was speaking more to the mischievousness of the fairies and that, like especially the little folks. Like, fine, maybe Queen of the Fairies doesn't care much about, but the little folk that aren't really doing a whole lot and aren't real important to fairy society as a whole, that they'd find this titillating that, teenagers getting together and thinking out and doing stuff and, that sort of a thing. And I don't really find it a sort of
Butcher himself being focused on it so much.
I don't
following
find the lore kind of. Yeah, exactly. Right. And
I'm like, it is quite the thing that, fairies and especially the lower ranks you get are typically, one-minded, one emotion at a time. And that's not really a butcher thing.
So the semi-pranksters and things like that. Right. And I'm like, hello, every urban legend out there is, the parked at Makeout Point and finding the hook in your door handle and you know what I mean? Like, there's always things like, where
every little town has their own kind
style. Yeah, and it's almost always involved, the teenagers went to make out somewhere and something happened, right? And so, I mean, to me, it's just that again. I'm just like, I just took that as sort of that humorous, playful, like, they get it, but they don't really, because I'm like, really, what's more awkward than, you're, 16 and trying to make out with your boyfriend for, and all of a sudden, like, your braces get stuck together or something. You're like, you know what I mean? It's like that awkward, amusing, seems so typical, like what a fairy would be apt to be like, dumb mortals, like,
we've all been there.
As opposed to the fairies being like, ooh, hubba hubba, come on, baby, show me, right? It's like, I don't see it that way. I don't see it as being as lecherous as all of that.
Right.
But yeah, and again, I can see fairies being that different species, that
the things they focus on are
the things that they would find like human mating behaviors to be a little bit more like interesting and curious and stuff like that. I'm like, we watch enough nature documentaries and stuff like that, right? But I'm like,
and to an extent that the fairies can't lie, it must be that much more intriguing to watch these
that's
idiots transgress the dating world, which is like the biggest lie.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, what? Well, that too, right? Because fairies are all about the tricking and misleading without actually lying. So that's very much the relationship world. No, my apartment is always this clean. I promise. I didn't do anything special for you. I always cook a gourmet meal every night just for myself after work. Yeah, no, exactly. So Harry figures, Harry's got some clues. He's like, all right, there was somebody here. There's a pizza place I can get in touch with to find out who was here. Like,
who did see?
Yeah, was it Buddy and his girlfriend? Was it like, a Jeopardy party? Like, what was
Tommy Tom and Jennifer
Stanley? Like, what was, exactly, who was all going on. So, so he packs up his stuff and starts heading back to his car. And then a very large man with a very large sword steps out and has a few words for Harry. And that's where we leave off.
Wraps it up.
This concludes our episode 3, Pizza and Sporting. You can find us online at freeflowrambling.com and McAnally's.ca. There we have links to other podcasts, social media, and other fun tidbits. Please subscribe if you like what you're hearing, and please consider supporting us through Patreon to keep the magic alive. We are Free Flow Rambling, and thank you for listening.